He only wanted a cup of coffee, a quiet morning, a small cafe, and a moment of peace before another long day. But in less than 5 minutes, that ordinary stop would shatter into something he'd never forget. Whispers grew into stares, stares into hostility. And then came an act so unexpected, it would change not just his life, but the lives of everyone in that room. What happened inside those four walls revealed a truth about racism most people choose to ignore. The question is, will you?
Marcus Taylor was the kind of man who blended into the rhythm of the city. At 38, he'd built a small but thriving life, running errands for neighbors, volunteering at the community center, and savoring his Saturday mornings at the same corner cafe, the one owned by Mrs. Evelyn, a widowed grandmother who knew every customer's name. That morning was no different, at least it shouldn't have been. The sun spilled gold over the cracked sidewalks, the air rich with the smell of fresh bread from the bakery down the block. Marcus smiled as he pushed open the cafe's door, ready for his usual cup and a quiet seat by the window. But even before the bell above the door stopped ringing, he felt it, a shift in the air. Eyes that lingered too long, conversations that hushed mid-sentence. Something was off. And while Marcus couldn't yet name it, this moment was the first ripple in a storm he never saw coming.
Marcus moved toward the counter, the familiar smell of roasted beans wrapping around him like a warm blanket. But the warmth didn't last. A man in a tailored gray suit, seated near the door, shifted his gaze from his laptop to Marcus. His eyes, cold, calculating, traveled from Marcus's worn sneakers to his neatly pressed shirt, then back up again. Mrs. Evelyn greeted him with her usual smile, but Marcus caught the subtle flicker of worry in her eyes. Before she could even take his order, the man in the suit stood and called out, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Are you sure he belongs here?" The room froze. Chairs stopped creaking. Spoons stopped stirring. For a second, Marcus wondered if he'd misheard. But then the whispers began. "He's here every week," Mrs. Evelyn replied firmly, but the tension was already spilling across the cafe like black ink and water. Two more customers, a young woman in the gym clothes and an older man with a leather briefcase, added fuel to the moment. "I saw him walking around earlier, looking at cars," the woman said, her voice dripping suspicion. Marcus's chest tightened. He had been looking at cars, admiring a vintage Mustang parked on the street. But now his curiosity was being twisted into something darker. The man in the suit took a step closer. "Look, I'm just saying this neighborhood's had break-ins. Better safe than sorry." Marcus could feel every set of eyes on him, weighing, judging. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. This wasn't just about coffee anymore. It was about defending his very right to exist in a space he'd called part of his Saturday ritual for years. Mrs. Evelyn tried to defuse the moment, sliding Marcus's coffee toward him, but the man didn't stop. "You don't understand, Evelyn. People like him." The words hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Marcus clenched the cup, his hands trembling. Should he walk out? If he left, they'd think they were right. If he stayed, the tension might boil over. Then the sound of the door opening pulled everyone's attention. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark overcoat stepped inside. He carried himself with quiet authority, someone you'd notice even without trying. He scanned the room, his gaze landing squarely on Marcus and then on the man in the suit. A small smile touched his lips, but there was something deliberate in his movement as he began to walk toward them. Marcus had no idea yet, but the next words spoken in that cafe would change everything, turning a moment of quiet humiliation into something that would ripple far beyond those four walls.
The man in the overcoat stopped beside Marcus's table. His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. "Is there a problem here?" The man in the suit smirked, gesturing toward Marcus. "Just making sure this guy isn't casing the place. You know, better to be safe." A hush fell so deep that even the hum of the espresso machine seemed to fade. Marcus felt heat crawling up his neck, his pulse thudding in his temples. The man in the overcoat's gaze hardened. "Is safe from what?" No one spoke.
Then the gym clothes woman muttered, "You know exactly what." It was a sentence that dripped with centuries of unspoken accusation. Marcus's throat tightened. This wasn't just suspicion. It was the quiet violence of a room deciding who you are before you've said a word. The overcoat man stepped closer to the suit, his voice low but sharp. "Do you have any proof, any reason at all, other than the color of his skin?" The man in the suit hesitated, his confidence faltering, but the damage was done. Every second Marcus sat there, surrounded by eyes that saw him as a threat, was a reminder of just how quickly a life could be reduced to a stereotype. And then, without warning, the suit reached for Marcus's coffee cup, slamming it onto the counter. "If he belongs here, let's see him prove it." The room gasped. Marcus's hands shook. He had done nothing wrong, yet here he was, forced to justify his presence in a cafe he'd visited dozens of times before. The silence wasn't just awkward, it was suffocating. In that moment, Marcus realized this wasn't about coffee, or even about him. It was about something bigger, a truth he could no longer ignore. And what happened next would decide whether this was just another quiet act of humiliation, or the moment everything changed.
The man in the overcoat stepped between Marcus and the suit, his voice cutting through the tension like glass breaking. "He doesn't have to prove a thing, but you just proved exactly what's wrong here." Mrs. Evelyn placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of Marcus, her hands steady, her eyes unflinching. "This one's on the house," she said softly, but the meaning was louder than any shout. It wasn't a gift, it was solidarity. The man in the suit muttered something under his breath, grabbed his laptop and stormed out. One by one, the whispers faded, replaced by the quiet clink of mugs and the hiss of the coffee machine. But Marcus knew the real noise, the one in his chest, would not fade so easily. He finished his coffee, left a tip larger than the bill, and walked out into the crisp morning air. On the surface, the world looked the same. Cars passing, pigeons scattering, sunlight spilling across the pavement. But inside, something had shifted. Marcus understood now, with a clarity that was almost painful, that racism doesn't always wear a hood or carry a weapon. Sometimes it sits at the next table, dressed in a suit, smiling while it strips away your dignity. And if this could happen to him, in a place he knew, among people he thought were neighbors, how many others were living the same story, unseen, unspoken? The truth is, racism doesn't just happen in headlines or viral videos. It happens in the quiet corners of everyday life. The question is, when it happens in front of us, will we speak or will we stay silent?